Happy Thursday, everybody. I'm Jade Scott. This is GrowthRx Live, and I'm coming to you today with a bit of a special edition, which is just me, myself, and I. I'm usually joined here by a wonderful guest and leader in the industry, but today I thought I would take the opportunity to talk to you about a couple of things that I love and transition, I guess, some of the leadership stuff that I talk about at our own practice, Western Region Health, amongst my team. And one of those things today is KPIs, and particularly embracing KPIs in private practice so that we can do better and be better and evolve, and also, I guess, tie that into one of the things that I love, which is leadership. So I'm just going to check, because I'm just going to check that we are live into the group now. Hello to everybody who is joining us. There we go. A few people watching already. So give me a shout out if you're there, and hit me in the comments. Because I am here on my own, I would love to see some of your comments and questions coming through today, because I don't have that other person sitting next to me. So yeah, hello and welcome everybody. So a little bit about me before we start. Usually I introduce and have some hard-hitting questions for some of the guests that I have on, but I think over the time I haven't really introduced myself too much to you and the GrowthRx community, who has embraced me and this platform so much. So thank you very, very much for that. I am an osteopath. I'm the founder of GrowthRx, and I'm also a business and a clinic owner for Western Region Health, which is two big clinics in the western suburbs of Melbourne. Have an amazing team of support behind me, with over 20 practitioners and multiple more people in the team of admin and all that sort of stuff. And I've grown from a really young, naive 22-year-old business owner who, I'm just checking the chat here as we go still through. Hey Claire, hi Laura. Laura's at home, pregnant, one of those twins coming out. Hey Jeff, how you going? So yeah, so I kind of grew, and I made a lot of mistakes over the years. And I think what I wanted to talk to you about today was some of the mistakes and some of the learnings, because I think if we don't look back and reflect, then we can't be expected to grow as practitioners. And one of the things that I've done that over the years with myself, and it started with me myself, is finding a tool that I could use to reflect on the type of practitioner that I was and the type of outcomes that I was getting with my patients. And that was KPIs. And then obviously implementing them into the team as something that we track. And I put together a presentation of slides and that sort of stuff today for you. But as I always love doing, I like looking at not only the science behind things and why we do things as humans, but also the psychology behind KPIs, or key performance indicators, and how they make people feel, and dive a little bit deeper into why people resist things. So that's where we're going to go today. So join me again, hit me in the comments if you've got any questions or anything like that. I can kind of answer them towards the end. But for now, I'm going to share my screen with you and share a couple of the slides that I have got prepared. So the topic of today, as I said, is key performance indicators. But what that means more than anything is how we tie this back to feedback, and how we use key performance indicators as a tool. Now, anyone who's ever heard me speak at the Good to Great in private practice, or also recently at the Business Growth Summit, they'll have seen me touch on this. But today, I'm going to extend on it a little bit more and tie it back to how we frame it and how we deliver them. Because obviously, people will resist what is not in their best interest. So it really comes down to how we deliver these as mentors, as leaders, as support people in an organisation, how we deliver KPIs to gain the best possible outcomes. And from my experience, often it's not a matter of people not doing this well, it's just that they don't know how to do it. And unfortunately, somewhere along the line, when you're tracking KPIs, there is a preconceived notion that they are tied to money. And everybody hates or feels uncomfortable talking about money in a clinical setting, which is another whole talk in itself. But when we're dealing with something that is reflective of our performance and therefore tied to money, it becomes a bit of a money grab that most clinic owners steer away from this difficult conversation. The second thing that makes it really difficult for us as clinic owners, or also depending on what model or remuneration model you work on, employee versus contractor, ultimately the law determines that you as a clinic owner can't enforce KPIs to contractors. Contractors are self-governed, they're autonomous in what they do. For the most part, even with respect, they still have the ability to come and go as they please, set their outcomes, and also rate their own performance. So what I want to do today is talk about the delivery of this and how important it is that this is way beyond just an employment model and tracking KPIs and employees. This is about us as practitioners wanting to get the best out of ourselves, to learn, grow and evolve, and to get the best patient outcomes and results, because ultimately it comes down to what we do every day, and that is helping people. And if I said to you, let's reframe this in a way that we can track and learn and grow to get better outcomes for our patients, it's something that you have to sit back and go, okay, Jade, I might strap in for the next half an hour and listen to the way that you're going to deliver this. Now, at the end, everybody's going to have their own opinions on this. My job is not to force my opinions on you. It's to make you think a little bit differently about KPIs and how we track and measure performance and the importance of that overall. Hey, Carly. Hey, Sally. Hey, Bibbs. Hello, everyone else who's still joining me. Why have I got a sandwich here? Sandwiches are very important when we look at the old school version of delivering feedback. Some of you might not know, but I had the luxury, I gifted myself, and I call it a gift because I spent a lot of money on my education a couple of years ago, and I had the pleasure of going over to study in Boston at Harvard University, and we did a huge module in our Authentic Leadership program on delivering feedback and difficult conversations. And this is what I'm talking to you about today. KPIs and delivering KPIs is number one, a difficult conversation to have, particularly if somebody is perhaps underperforming. Also, how feedback can be very subjective. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and also how, because it's a difficult conversation, we sort of wrap it in this sandwich, this positivity sandwich. So let's deliver feedback in a positive notion. Let's then be a little bit more constructive and critical. And let's finish off with a little bit of a warm hug wrapped in another little bit of a positive feedback there. What I like to call it is, let's get a rock, wrap it in fairy floss, get somebody to eat it and hope they don't bite down on it. Ultimately, if you're going to give constructive feedback, it's usually not very, very well received. And the reason why that is because who actually determines the accuracy of the feedback? When feedback is subjective and we're talking about a source of truth. So for example, a great example of this is excellence. Excellence is really hard to define in the dictionary. It's being able to excel at something, but it's very subjective in regards to the opinions and perceptions of those people that are defining the excellence. And often we do that in the workplace. We've got a business owner who says, I want you to excel, I want you to be excellent. Let's track KPIs to actually see whether that's the case. The source of truth is really subjective. And when it comes from one person's opinion and another, this is where we kind of get a little bit of backlash, because who determines the accuracy of that feedback is really, really important. You've got that notion of, well, it's my business, I know how I want it to run, and this is what I want the outcomes to be. This is what the expectations of your role are. You're well within your rights to do that. But when you're also in a contractor model working under the umbrella of an organisation, you've still got your own autonomy, and you've still got the ability to determine yourself whether you're performing or not. So whose right is it to come to you and sit down, even if it is their mentor, even if it is delivered well? How we actually frame this when we're having one of these conversations is really important, and that's kind of what we're going to step across to next. Statistics don't lie. Whilst opinions and truth and excellence can all be subjectively delivered, statistics fundamentally, no matter what industry you're in, if you're tracking numbers and you're making it a consistent pattern that you follow over time, patterns start to evolve, and generally, as a common rule, statistics don't lie, which is why people like to fall or lean on KPIs to remove the subjective nature of feedback. We make things more objective. So in an effort to deliver feedback that is far better received, to have that notion of subjection removed from it, we use statistics to bring in some objective views. But this is where the resistance starts to happen. So in the same school of thought, you've got some clinics and some industries. We have been delivering KPIs since 2012 at Western Region Health. We've been tracking numbers, we've been tracking figures for a really long time. Now, our team embrace KPIs, and I'm going to explain to you the whole purpose of this is explaining to you how I kind of deliver KPIs, so they're framed to look at them through more of a positive lens than a negative lens. But you can have something presented to you and people are still going to resist it. The reason why people resist things, and we're going to talk about the behavioral psychology behind resisting what is not in our best interest and how we frame this to get a better result. But ultimately, it's the fear of failure. If we're giving somebody objective statistics that show them without any feedback at all, without any truth, without any subjection, that they potentially might not be performing as much as they would like, fear kind of sets in. And we're going to talk about the 7 human needs and why and how this ties into that when we're actually talking about KPIs. Because it does come down to truth. And often, if we know as a practitioner, whether it's, and I remember back to being a graduate, I didn't know what I was doing. I felt like I was faking it half the time. I was flailing. I didn't know how to grow, but because of my ambition and my drive, I also wanted to fast track my growth. I understood the importance of looking back and reflecting on where my shortcomings were and where I was failing so that I could stop that, evolve and grow in the future. But that comes down to mindset. And a lot of people do fear truth because it doesn't make us feel good about ourselves. We also, I can tell you now, I don't actively constantly go back to things often that I'm failing at. A great example of that, when I was little, I pride myself on trying to be good at everything. If I'm not good at something naturally, I will certainly invest, I'll practice and I'll polish and I will put time into things that are important to me. But I cannot, have never and will never be able to ride a skateboard. Okay, I tried, I went back, and there's only so many times that you can fall off before you kind of go, you know what, I'm actually no good at this and I don't want to keep trying because I just don't enjoy it. When we constantly fail or feel like we're failing as a practitioner, it's really hard after 4 or 5 or 6 years of studying something to turn around and really reflect on areas that we're not good at. So often what we do is we put our head in the sand, and instead, like me with my skateboard, instead of me realizing, hey, I was really bad at this, I just put the skateboard away, let my brother do it, and just kind of went about my business and thought there's so many other things. We do this, and it's a part of internal confirmation bias, is that we constantly don't keep failing, or there's only so many times that we can fail. But this is why we kind of fear it, because it's about our identity and it's about who we are. But if we can kind of frame all of this, that if we look back and if we reflect and we can grow from things and be better and do better, then maybe people might look at things a little bit differently. So before I kind of go on and talk more about KPIs, we need to talk about why people resist them. And there's a lot of people out there, if you're sitting there listening, going, no, give me KPIs. I love them. I like to reflect. I like to learn. I like to grow. Jeff, this is probably going to be you. I mean, you're such a self-motivated person. People who are self-driven embrace things. They embrace KPIs. And often one of the 6 motivating factors of how people are motivated, one of them is through reflection and review. But the 7 fundamentals we have as human needs, the first one is subsistence, which is security, support, and the ability for somebody to support themselves, just even on a basic level. Okay, so I'm going to go through all of these and then I'm going to talk about how I'm going to tie these back to KPIs in a second. So that's the first one, security and safety. And often this is what ties us into an income. Okay, we have to, whether we like it or not, we're in a fee-for-service driven model. And if, how good we're performing at something usually does have a direct correlation with how much money we're going to earn within that industry. Number 2, the second one of our 7 fundamental human needs, and depending on what literature you read, these are worded different ways. Some say we've got 4 human needs. I've kind of packaged this up today for 7, depending on what evidence you want to support. But it's connections, which falls into relationships. We build relationships at work and we build relationships with our patients every day. So if we're going to look at a statistic that tells us our failures or our shortcomings in building these relationships, we're going to resist that. We'd rather not know. The third one is our contribution. We need to know as human beings that we're contributing somewhat to what we're doing every single day. We also want to feel valued in the workplace, and we also kind of want that recognition and reward. So if we have this framing of KPIs that our only contribution we bring to the workplace is about billing more, booking more, seeing more, and we have that tie-in for our KPIs to the money that we're driving and bringing in for an industry, of course we're going to resist it. So that's another reason, based upon our human needs, it's another reason why people would resist KPIs. This is just, exploring all of those reasons why people resist. The other one, number 4, is esteem and identity. Again, this falls back on safety and security. We want to know, as human beings, as practitioners, as people that have chosen to work in a service-driven industry, that what we're doing every day matters. Everybody wants to know that they matter and that they're delivering, again, which comes down to one of the next ones, is purpose and meaning. But our identity is really, really important. And if KPIs are used to track and to determine a reflection of our identity, again, resistance is going to come into play. The 5th one is self-governance. This is, I guess, where it ties into a little bit people who are paid or remunerated on a contractor model. They have that autonomy, they have the control to make their own decisions and to determine their own performance. So when somebody else comes along and says, hey, let's track KPIs and let's have statistics determine how well you're performing, people go, no, I can determine that myself. It is one of our fundamental human needs that we want to be able to make our own decisions, and we want our own autonomy in determining how well we're performing at something we choose to do constantly and repetitively. Number 6, significance, purpose, meaning, impact, value, all of these sorts of things. We want to know as a human need that we are delivering purpose and meaning and value to our patients. So if we were delivered with a statistic that suggested something otherwise, of course we're going to resist that. We don't want to have it thrown in front of our face that we're terrible on a skateboard. We just don't jump on a skateboard anymore. So this is why people are resisting things like KPIs, not because of what they represent, but because of how they make us feel. And this is really important if you're a leader or a business owner or even a peer talking to each other about what KPIs actually mean. If they're tied into how they make us feel, then we can better understand why we resist them. Number 7 is understanding and growth. So of those top 6, I can totally understand why people resist having tracked statistical performance or having a figure that measures and determines whether they're performing well as a practitioner or not. I can totally understand that. But when it comes to number 7, the 7th fundamental human need that we need, now this is not me just determining this is all of the literature that you will ever read. The 7th one is understanding and growth. This is where our learning, our development, our reflection, and our review comes into. This, of the 7 fundamental human needs, this is why we need KPIs. This is why we need to reflect. And not subjectively, but objectively. This is why we need to be reviewing. Because if we don't have something measurable that we can track, we're not getting a true indication of where our strengths and weaknesses lie. And lastly, certainty of all of the above. That is the other fundamental need, is every single one of those. We need certainty. This is why COVID is affecting us so much at the moment, because we have no certainty about our future. We've got no certainty. If you have a think about them, have a look at these now, and let's just take COVID and think about how this has impacted on people all over the world, how it's impacted on our human needs. It's affected our ability to earn an income, to have a secure, safe income. It's affected our relationships and our connections with people. We can't see people. We're in lockdown. We're in a closed kilometre radius. We can't see our loved ones. Our contributions, our recognition, reward. There's some people who can't even go to work. So they're not actually getting that value back. Their esteem, their identity, their security, they're not being able to do things every day that matter, that contribute to society. Our self-governance, we're being told what to do. We're being told to stay in lockdown. We're being told to stay at home. Our significance, our purpose, our meaning, our jobs, our ability to create meaningful change is being affected. And our ability to grow as human beings has been stunted and stagnated through COVID. We have no certainty, which is why COVID has been so destructive on a global level, is because it affects every single one of our 7 fundamental human needs. It's powerful stuff, but a lot of people don't tie most things that we do into the behavior and the psychology behind why we embrace things and why we resist them. So moving on from all of this, when we talk about how we reframe KPIs, then how do we make them a positive reflection over something that's resisted? We need to tie it into that 7th fundamental need, which is understanding and growth. So if we tie that into CPD and learning, KPIs, think about this, can be used as an internal way of offering personal reflective CPD week in, week out. By tracking the responses of our patient outcomes, of our treatment plans, and how we manage our patients and clients, we're getting professional development every single week. And if you're not somebody who's doing that, then the same notion applies. You're missing out on really valuable learning tools. Because when we're learning, by definition, we're adding something that's not there. Or the alternate to that is we're recognizing, reinforcing, or refining what already is. So if we think about KPIs just like this as it is now, let's reframe them and say, okay, let's use these tools, or these statistical measures that we can track over time and create patterns and look at peaks and troughs. And if we're having a weakness in some particular area in our patient management, we can find that in the stats and we can add something that's not there. We can focus our mentoring on an aspect or an area of our management plan with a patient and build and grow and learn from it. Or ultimately, the opposite of that is, if we do see a strength in our statistics, we can praise that, we can showcase that, we can reinforce that. And we might be able to use that as a tool and say, hey, this is a wonderful strength of mine. Maybe I might be able to teach somebody else this strength. But unless we're getting clarity through numbers and through statistics, we can't possibly better determine where our strengths and weaknesses lie, which means we can't grow, we can't learn, and we can't understand. Or we can, but we just do it at a much slower rate than some other people. So this is how we fast track our ability to do better and be better as practitioners. If we keep studying failure, we're only going to learn failure. And this is what I want to make really, really clear. KPIs aren't just there as a fetish for finding failure. We need to look at KPIs to determine where people are thriving and praise and recognize the contribution value that they bring from that. So there's 2 schools of thought here. It's not all about failure. It can be about praise. But if you don't look back and reflect, how can we actually expect to learn? If we don't have something tangible to measure, then we can't get closer to our future goals and our vision and our growth, which means our growth, by definition, just becomes stunted. So feedback always needs to reflect growth. So when we reframe why we're introducing or why we're looking at certain key performance indicators and statistics, We need to think about it as, how am I going to do better and be better? And how can I use these to grow as a practitioner so that ultimately my patient can get better outcomes and better results? My purpose, meaning my impact on their life, my ability to change, my ability to lead them in the consultation room, be better leaders, be better peers, be better practitioners. You can all tie back into KPIs. So how do we change this? Firstly, how do we change the perception of KPIs? We need to reframe it. The power of reframing and looking at something through a positive lens is everything we've kind of done, and also tying it back into those 7 fundamental needs, understanding why. So rather than just tell somebody, just suck it up, this is what we're doing, we're going to deliver KPIs in our workplace, or I want you to track them, or you should track them. We need to think about not what KPIs represent statistically, but how they make us feel. And only when we understand how KPIs as a measure of somebody's performance makes them feel is the only way we're going to better deliver or support or help them looking through it in a more positive lens. So number 1, we can use KPIs to focus on people's strengths. It doesn't always have to be bad. Why can't we use them initially to say, okay, let's not look at where maybe you might be underperforming, because again, that's a sense of truth and that's subjective. Obviously stats don't lie, but let's not deal with that first. Let's try and use them to find out where our strengths are. Secondly, let's use them as a source of reflection. From one week to the next, have a look back and reflect on the patients that came in the week before and the outcomes that we produce for those patients. Let's use them as a reflective tool. And then thirdly, let's tie them back to purpose, learning, growth, and outcomes. So moving on from that, if you've got any questions or anything, if you've got any feedback, I'm looking at the chat, I can actually see the chat box. So if you're kind of still with me, hit me with some comments or anything like that. I'd love to know from you guys, if I haven't covered it already, why you believe people resist KPIs, why you potentially haven't introduced them into the workplace, whether it's just because they're not done, whether they've been introduced and they've been delivered poorly, or whether you're using them currently and you're finding them a really, really useful tool. So I'd love to hear from some of you guys how you're using KPIs currently before I go into this. But the next step is to talk about the KPIs that we track at Western Region Health. And again, this is just within my own experience, and I'm just using that as a guide. And I would love to hear some different perspectives on how other people are using KPIs in the workplace. But I think when you go tracking so many stats, that they get lost. So if you were tracking all different types of figures, then you can kind of get bombarded with the numbers, and not everyone is a numbers. I love a spreadsheet. I don't know about you, but some people just don't. Some people look at figures and just think, what is that? What has those figures got anything to do with how I could possibly do my job better, perhaps? So the ones that we look at is capacity and patient numbers. Then we're looking at patient rebooking and retention. So Claire says, I haven't been using them as I was scared of them because of the failure mentality. Exactly. But what you just said, thank you. I guess it is. It's that framing that often we fear the unknown and we fear what we believe is not in our best interest. So if we reframe that, and hopefully, Claire, you can start to do that and see just a little bit of a different perspective, you might be able to embrace them. And the other thing is, why not try them? A lot of people just are a hard no when it comes to KPIs. Why not introduce something, sit here, learn potentially from my example and from others who's been doing it for 8 years now, and knowing the benefit it had on my business, and I can sit here and talk to you about it today, and I can talk to you about why. Maybe go, okay, well, maybe I'll try something new. If I keep doing what I've already got, I'm going to get more of what I've already got. And maybe have that different perspective. So thank you, Claire. Thanks for sharing. So the next one is patient rebooking or retention. We're going to go through these individually. Patient visit average and then cancellation rate. There's lots more KPIs that people track in a clinical setting, but these are just the 4 that I'm going to talk about today. Otherwise, you can kind of get bogged down. We do long-term patient relationship retention, all of that sort of stuff. One of the things that I'll also note that we do at Western Region Health is I never ever talk about KPIs and money in the same conversation. I know that some people do, and I'm not suggesting that that's wrong, but I think a lot of my team and in past conversations that I've had with them, there is that sense of if you tie KPIs into bill more, book more, see more, it does start to become a bit of a collaborative association between book lots more patients, earn lots more money. Now, that's again, some people who are driven by money, absolutely, you can explore that concept. But mostly, I usually just myself, I keep the two conversations separate. I talk about KPIs as practitioner growth. And then ultimately, if you're growing as a practitioner, money, outcomes, everything will eventually come. So I generally don't talk about the two, but the two absolutely are not mutually exclusive. So if we take each one of these individually, patient numbers, to break it down really, really basically, Tram has just said, I resisted KPIs for all of my first year out because I knew that my inner critic was, it could be so loud. Exactly. When we are self-motivated people who, nobody likes failure. Nobody likes to have their shortcomings put up on a pedestal and then announced to you, because again, when it comes back to those 7 fundamental needs, it's our identity. Our ego is a security guard that guards the door to our identity and makes sure that we're safe and secure all the time. So yeah, why would you openly say, hey, bring it on, tell me where I'm failing? Absolutely. And particularly as a new graduate who doesn't have the vast level of experience or possibly that professional maturity in regards to being a little bit more resilient in private practice, I can absolutely understand why they would be resistant. So thanks, Tram. So patient numbers and capacity. This is how many patients a practitioner has seen in a week, or when it comes to capacity, how many they can see in a week. So if you're only working 3 days and your appointment book suggests that you max out at 50 patients a week, then that's what your capacity is. So 100% being fully booked is 50 patients. Seeing 25 patients in a week is being 50% full, or a capacity of 50%. We need to know, if we want to look at performance, we need to know what 100% is. Because if you know that you're underperforming, if you know what your limitations or capabilities are, only then do we know how we tie that back to performance. The next one that we look at is patient rebooking or retention. So of the total number of patients you've seen in 1 week, so again, let's just use that example of 50, how many of them have an active future booking? Or how many of them have you rebooked that actually do have an active appointment in your calendar? So again, if you saw 50 patients last week and 25 of those rebooked, then you've got a 50% retention rate or a 50% rebooking rate. I don't like the term rebooking as such, because it comes back to that book. Let's rebook everybody. When it comes to retention, I see that more as building relationships and communication and outcomes and all those sorts of things that I'm going to extend on in a little bit. So it comes down to framing. So I replace the term patient rebooking with patient retention. So patients that are still active and still coming and seeking your guidance and your expertise. Cancellation rate. Of the total number of patients that were rebooked, so let's say again, back to that example, you saw 50 patients in a week and you rebooked 40 of them. Okay, so your retention rate is quite good. That's kind of sitting at around about 70%-ish. I'm not doing the figures in my head, so don't hold me to that. But if of those 40 patients you retained as a future booking, now I'm not talking in the following week when I talk about retention, I'm talking about any future booking. So whether they've been rebooked for the following week or for 2 weeks' time, or whether you've decided to touch base with them after a month, that's a future booking. So that's considered patient retention. When we look at cancellation rate, of those people that you actually did actively book, who then went ahead and booked an appointment in your calendar, how many of those ran up and just said, don't need it, never coming back? That's your cancellation rate. So if you rebooked 40 people out of the 50 that you saw the previous week, and then 20 of those actually called up and went, hey, nah, don't need it, or not coming back in, you've got a 50% cancellation rate. That's huge. The scary thing is, the more clinics that I work with and have done over the years, there's so many people that just do not track, and particularly new graduates, they don't track their cancellation rate. And we're going to extend a little bit more on what these mean as a feedback tool when it comes to patient management. And that's how we're going to tie this all in at the end. So a patient visit average. What is the average number of times a practitioner will see a new patient? This is time frame dependent. This is totally different depending on what clinic you talk to. Sometimes you can have a PVA over a 12-month period. Sometimes we track, and ourselves at Western Region Health, we track patient visit averages over a 3-month period. So of all the new patients that a practitioner saw in that 3-month time period, on average, how many times were those patients seen? So for example, if you had 10 new patients that came in and those 10 new patients collaboratively came in 50 times, then you've got a patient visit average of 5. When you actually go back and look at these stats, there's a huge number of people that make assumptions. This is the one KPI that when you talk to practitioners, they will overestimate, because they know, they go, oh yeah, well, I'd easily see a new patient 3 times. My patient visit average would be 3. I'd see them the first time, I'd rebook them and probably check on them a week later, and then I'd probably follow them up 2 weeks later. Easy. It's really easy to see a new patient 3 times. When I worked back in 2018, I worked with about 80 different businesses, and when I went in and spoke to them and actually asked them to track the patient visit averages of their team. Now, every single industry is different, whether it be physio, chiro, osteo, all have different assumptions or expectations of what that PVA should be. I know at a minimum, most physiotherapy clinics are at about 6. Chiropractic clinics are at about 8 to 10 plus usually, because it depends on the frequency of consultations as well and how often those consultations are spread over that 3-month period. Osteopathy at a bare minimum, our KPI amongst our team is 3. Now, I didn't determine that on my own. I didn't force it on my team. When I talked about KPIs and when I introduced these for the first time, we went for a weekend away. And I said, I don't want to force this on you. I want you to reflect on what it means to be a practitioner. And in an effort to get the absolute minimum best outcomes out of your patients, how many times do you think that you would have to see them? And almost all of my entire team said at least 3. So we put together a collective KPI minimum of 3. So anything below 3, you could say, well, in regards to performance, maybe I've got a weakness there. Maybe there's something that I'm not doing right. Maybe I'm not communicating well enough, educating a patient well enough. There's no buy-in on the treatment plan. Maybe I'm not explaining the buy-in well. Maybe my prognosis, understanding of tissue healing times is failing me. There are so many things that we can learn from KPIs, which we're going to go through in a second. We need to reframe these as a means of learning and growth and reflective tools. And I'll go as far as to say that if you're not doing these by the end, then you are actively choosing not to grow as a practitioner by not implementing some sort of tracking mechanism to objectively track your patient management. So when we look at all of these, let's kind of break down each one of them here. So when it comes to capacity or patient numbers, this is our patient load. This is our number of services that we can possibly deliver in a week. If somebody's tracking at 90% or 100% capacity every single week, week in, week out, then we could probably say that they're running off about 100% fully booked, 100% retention. Their retention rate is great. They've got a great, I'd love you to tell me in some of the comments what this means if you are fully booked. If you're fully booked and you're running off 100% capacity every single week, let's get away from the numbers here for a second. What do you think that says about you as a practitioner, regardless of what industry you're in? If you've got a fully booked chiropractor, physio, EP, osteo, by being fully booked week in, week out, after 3 to 5 years in practice, what does this actually say about you as a practitioner? If you're watching at home, and I can see there's some of you there, I'd love to know in the comments what this actually means. What does this reflect? If somebody's busy, they're usually good communicators. they've built up good relationships, they've built up a rapport and trust over time. It's usually reflective of the type of person they are, their core values, how they deliver, how they talk, how they empathize with patients. So using this as a reflective tool, if somebody out, pose this question to you. If somebody's been out in practice for 10 years and they're still only 50% booked, what does that say about them as a practitioner? It might be that they just don't want to have the capacity to be full, or all of those sorts of things. But generally after 10 years in practice, the great thing about it is that you don't have to be 50% capacity over 5 days. You're usually 100% capacity, and you start to break up your week and you actually work 3 days at full capacity and have a couple of days off to go play golf, or to go do some mentoring, or to do some, clinic growth or mentoring or courses or development. It's very, very rare, and tell me if I'm wrong, to get a practitioner who's been 10 years out in practice, who is a thriving, exceptional, excellent practitioner, who really struggles to fill their appointment book. So it is a reflective tool. How fully booked you are from one week to the next. I'm not talking about new grads who haven't built up a patient base. I'm talking about, as Lorraine says, it has to demonstrate a very good practitioner, absolutely. So we have to be able to look at our patient numbers and track them over time. Is our capacity going up? Do we start off at 50% full? And then by the end of the year, we're 90% fully booked. That shows growth. It's certainly from the beginning of a year to the end of the year, if our capacity is running at 50%, and by the end of the year, it's 90%, it shows that we've formed better relationships, better trust, or that the clinic has done a huge marketing campaign and is smashing through a whole lot of patients through. But ultimately, it reflects on you as a practitioner. It's a great work. It's tying it back through that positive lens. You're doing something amazingly. Let's see what it is that you're doing really well and champion it and do more of it. And then maybe get you to teach that to other people. It sets up a beautiful structured mentoring program where we start to showcase people's strengths within a team, and we can learn from each other. So the second one, patient retention or rebooking. If you're retaining patients and patients choose to keep seeing you, to choose to keep giving you money and transfer that financial transaction, which is fee for service, they choose to give up their time to come back and see you ongoing. And even then, even better, you build a relationship with them over time where you become their primary source of booking, where when they hurt themselves, they still come back in, or they decide that they just want that ongoing proactive care and they want to see you every 4 to 6 weeks. What does that say about you as a practitioner? What does this particular KPI statistic tell you? If your retention rate, or from 1 week to the next, 95% of your patients are coming back in, yes, it could say that you're really aggressive with the booking, but we're going to talk about why the cancellation rate is really important to weed out those people who are not authentic or insincere with their booking and their treatment management. What it tells about us is that we're building relationships, we're building trust, our communication, our connections, our empathy with these patients, our conviction, our confidence when we're delivering a treatment plan has been brought in by the patient. They understand the importance of investing in their health and investing into you. This is what a retention statistic reflects, not bill more, book more, see more, earn more money. If you're not being naive and you step away from that shroud of stigma attached to KPIs, this is what it means. This is why we do it. Relationships, communication, conviction. The next set out from that, and I'll come back to that one in a minute, cancellation rate. If you are booking 95% week in, week out, you're like, yep, for every 50 patients that I see, I'm rebooking 40 of them, my retention rate's really good, my communication's great, my relationships are great, and then 50% of them cancel out. Are you going to be able to hail yourself as a great practitioner building all of these relationships? Something's going wrong still. If you're rebooking 95% or even 100% of patients, and then 50% of them are ringing up afterwards going, yeah, no. There's two things that are happening. They're cancelling because they're 100% better and they don't need you and you're a genius, so you should have a yacht on the Caribbean and you should be certainly telling us all what it is that you're doing. Or secondly, something hasn't gone quite right. They've made expectations potentially of what their outcome should be, maybe unrealistic expectations that you didn't quite communicate with them. Maybe you didn't connect with them. Maybe you didn't show enough empathy. Maybe your technical hands-on skills were a little bit not quite there. Maybe you made them worse. Maybe they just didn't click with you. Maybe they judged you. Maybe they ended up going to see their best mate's physio for no other reason other than the fact that somebody suggested it. There is a reason why people don't come back. But if you're not looking back and reflecting on how many people aren't coming back, then you don't get an opportunity to grow. And if you rather sit there and put your head in the sand and make an assumption that these people aren't coming back because they're better, you don't get to make an assumption in clinical practice either. How about you pick up the phone and you say, hey, you cancelled your appointment. I just wanted to make sure that you're okay. If they turn around and go, yep, absolutely, I'm feeling $1 million. I literally don't need this. I'll give you a call when I need you next. You're like, yes, high five, fist pump, all you like. But I can tell you now that doesn't equate in all of my years of practice to the first reason why people cancel. So the tie-on effect of this cancellation rate is we have a cancellation register. We actually record every single patient that cancels and their reason why, so that our practitioners and we can reflect on our outcomes, our communication, our ability to build connections and relationships, the confidence in our treatment plan, and whether our treatment plan was actually followed through. So cancellation rate and why people don't come back is just as important as why they do. And somewhere in between there is your ability to grow and learn from tracking this statistic. And the patient visit average, lastly, is not done from week to week, and it's done over roughly a minimum 3-month period. And again, this ties for me back to that relationships, that connection, that communication, the long-term management of a patient. And those of you who did my Good to Great in Private Practice on the weekend, I talk about this stratified or this STAR approach to rebooking, where they suggest that best patient outcomes are delivered in 6 consultations. Statistically and evidence-based, the research showed that patients who had the best outcomes were seen 6 times. If your PVA is 1.7, you're not even getting the chance to see a patient a second time. Most people who aren't tracking a patient visit average have no idea of the evidence-based management of a patient and what those implications might be. If you know that best outcomes comes from seeing a patient 3 to 5 or 5 to 8 times, depending on the condition, or 10 times plus for a chronic condition, and you only see somebody twice, that's 2 consultations where I believe that patient has actually wasted their money. So rather than think about it as I've done this twice, you've actually failed them twice. That's a bit of a truth bomb that I'd like to drop. If you don't know why a patient has chosen to not come back, you've not gained a wealth of knowledge in feedback from somebody that's going to help you help the next patient in their patient management. So we've looked at all of these things here. We've looked at the importance of why it's really important and what these KPIs mean, and tying it back outside of just statistical significance or performance or bill more, book more, see more. When you look about it and when you frame these and when you look at the overarching reasons why we objectively use this data, it should only be about practitioner growth. And if using this data is about practitioner growth and development and learning, then my question to you to ponder is, why wouldn't you do it? What reasons now, after I've delivered this, I would love to know, and I would love to be able to support some of these responses. Knowing this now, I'd love to know why you wouldn't. And this is not enforced by your business owner. This is irrelevant. I'm talking to sole traders, contractors, anyone out there who is practicing to get best outcomes for a patient. I'm asking you, after hearing this, why would you choose still not to track KPIs? That's kind of one of my questions to you. Now, the outside of this is, and before I go on, Lorraine has got a question. What tools do you use to do these calculators? This is really hard. I'm probably going to have a conversation with Josh at Clinico. We use Front Desk. There are so many Nuclear. There are so many software packages that it is really different depending on the software. At the end of the day, these values for us at our clinic and the beautiful spreadsheets that my incredible practice manager puts together every 2 weeks. Once upon a time, I did it. I did the hustle and grind. I did all the calculations myself at one point. And then obviously you get to a point where you get to be able to delegate and hand out some authority to some other beautiful team members who do it really, really well. I have the luxury of not having to do this myself anymore, but I can tell you now, if I had to, and if I didn't have that person helping me, I would still do it. This is done mostly manually. It does take time. It is quite laborious to get these statistics, but the long-term value effects of doing this and tracking, when you can look back on data and patterns of individual practitioners over years of growth, is so invaluable that it's worth the time that you put in. So there are different ways, in answer to your question, Lorraine. I can't answer your question because if yours depends on the software package, but I've given you kind of, if you kind of go back and look through this talk, I've given you the ways where you get patient numbers, you look how many have returned, and you literally kind of divide it. We've got 22 practitioners and we still do it manually. Yep. So if you've got 3 to 5 practitioners, it's still, no matter what you do, you still have to, but there are searches and reports that I know that a lot of software do that actually make this process easier, but you would have to probably take my description of what it is that you're trying to achieve in these and then talk to your software company to find out the best reports to run to be able to achieve this in the quickest possible time. So I'm really sorry, Lorraine, if I couldn't give that to you, right? Because I don't know your software package, it's really hard to answer. So lastly, the most important thing about KPIs is when it comes to being valued, and one of those other last 7 fundamental human needs is people want to feel valued. They want to feel important. They want to feel like they matter. Their identity, their self-esteem is recognized beyond that of just tracking statistics. People are more than just numbers, and they need to be respected and treated as such. These KPIs are tools to help them grow, but they are not reflective of the type of people that they are. So outside of that, if you want KPIs to work and thrive in your business, you need to value people outside of just numbers. You need to explore the value that somebody brings into an organization outside of just booking and retention and all those sorts of things. Even though you can tie it back into patient management, you need to be able to look at these things. And I call them KPCs. Because contribution, and I took it from that when I went through all my study and all my learning, this word contribution came up constantly as one of our fundamental human needs. We want to be able to contribute. And when we are contributing to an organization, to a workplace, to a team, to a culture, we want that seen. We want to be recognized and valued for the contribution we bring outside of that of just KPIs. And this is where KPCs are really important. Some of the things that I look at, and ironically, these all start with C, and I'm sure that other people have got other core values and reflective characteristics, traits and skills that they track outside of just KPIs. But for us, we look at somebody's character and core values, the type of person that they are, because usually the type of person they are is the type of practitioner that they will be. Then it's their commitment, but also consistency. Consistency is the key. You don't get to delegate or get somebody's support in something or have somebody dig deep for a week and then kind of let it go for the rest of the year. Consistency is the key. And if somebody is constantly investing into the culture with a smile on their face, coming into work with a positive attitude and a growth mindset, you want to recognize that. Now, there's lots of different ways that I recognize KPCs, and that is another whole talk in itself. And we do a lot of that at the Business Summit, and I'm really excited to tell everybody that I've got a web app coming that actually helps tie in tracking KPCs and also valuing people based upon their key performance contributors. So that is coming. So I'll do another talk on that when that web app is ready. I've been working on that for about 6 months, and that is to tie all of this sort of stuff together, which is something that I'm really, really proud of, is to be able to have a look at people, reflect on their contribution value that they both bring together, and have it as a really valuable tool that business owners can use, but practitioners can actually remove that subjective nature of feedback out of it. Number 3 is is connections and culture. So this is the relationship building type stuff. So, what are their relationships like amongst their teams and amongst their peers? And, do they have a bestie at work? Are they the ones always helping out on admin? And, are they the ones that everyone goes to for help? Or when they break up with a boyfriend, is it the first person they go to for a hug? We've got so many beautiful personalities in our workplace. We've had, Mama Jude before, who is everybody's workplace mum. We've got Naomi, who's like the engine room and the rock of support that supports us all. We've got some other beautiful personalities that just walk in the room who are always smiling all the time. These people, I thank them for this contribution value that they bring all the time. And the last one is competence. Knowing that you can delegate out to somebody and that they're going to be accountable and that the job's going to get done. There's no amount of KPIs that can actually track competence. Competence is something that, again, ties into all the rest of them. Can they actually follow through on a goal-orientated task and actually have the right outcome at the end outside of just patient management? So that's kind of all of them there. So I'll stop sharing my screen for a second. I can kind of head over to the chat. I don't know. I'm almost running on time here. So time for a couple of questions if you've got any. But outside of that, thank you so much for listening and embracing a different perspective. I think when it comes to KPIs, it gets the short end of the stick. And also for many years, even myself, the perception and the assumption from me when I talked about business as a business owner and as a very, very proud businesswoman and boss lady, as I'm affectionately known at work, people just assumed that my underlying driving motivator was money. And anyone who's ever worked with me, who's ever been to my courses, and there's people watching now, you will know that money is not what drives me, but it's a wonderful byproduct of delivering all of those things beautifully and well: connections, relationships, communication, and adhering to and understanding people's 7 fundamental human needs. If you take the time to think less about implementing something and more about how people are going to feel when you do, you'll get a much, much better result. So my advice to most of you is don't fear KPIs. Look to them for reflection and growth and learning. See them as an internal form of CPD. And whilst you can't enforce them if you're not in an employment model, the other thing that I'll say is I would hate to think that any of my employees or our employees, because we're a team, feel like KPIs are enforced. When they understand my thought process behind them and the value and why I see them as so important, they actually see that vision as well. It resonates with them when you deliver it and frame it in a positive mind and look through it in a positive lens. And it's something that's embraced. And I also, in the past, I've had some where I've just failed miserably and I haven't explained this very, very well. But I'm also of the notion that if something does make somebody really uncomfortable knowing all of this, then I'd simply remove KPIs. Because if you've got the best intentions, you don't want somebody to be feeling terrible by getting them. And you also, in that growth mindset, if something is a little bit destructive, you're not going to enforce that either. But having these conversations, having these open and honest conversations where people know that their contribution is valued is really, really important. So think about KPIs differently. Think about how you deliver them. Think about how you receive them. And have these open conversations. The first place to start is by talking about them. And if this talk and this webinar becomes a tool that you can use amongst your team, that you embrace people to watch just to see a different perspective, then that's enough for me. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of the week. Thank you. Bye.